Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
Thank you for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. Today, the handsome gentleman sitting across from me is the co-founder of Oracle, Mr. Edward Oates, better known as Ed Oates. And now he is the president of Rock Your Business, and you can see it behind him. You can't miss it. And somewhere before this segment is over, he can share Rock Your Business with us and exactly what that is. But today he is on Conversations with Jennylyn to have a discussion with me on education. Education is very important because if we're stupid, then we can't do a lot of things to succeed in life. So it comes in many forms and institutions, and it comes from experiences. But today, I think the education we are discussing has to do with the education you get in an institution. So welcome to Conversations with Jennylyn, Ed.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate it.
Well, this is not our first meeting on a television show or setting. And I've always enjoyed interviewing you, and I'm really grateful to you that you have time to spare for me today and anyone watching this.
Yeah, I always have time for you, Jenny.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to do a segment on education, especially because of the struggles people are experiencing now during distance learning because of the pandemic. In the past, I've noticed, because I haven't come from this education system, although every day of your life you're getting an education, my education, my former education, I received in South America and the Caribbean. And so I learned of the American system because I have two daughters and they have gone through the system. So I get it. But what I've noticed is when you're seeking employment, if you have a degree from a university that's considered prestigious or Ivy League, you always stand ahead of the pack in most cases, because people prefer someone who has that education. And that's what I wanted to discuss today, because I believe not everybody has an opportunity to attend an institution that's considered Ivy League, not because of their abilities, but because of their pocketbook. And as a person who formed a huge mega corporation, I thought you would be a great person to have this discussion with.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let me just talk about prestige universities and a little bit about Oracle and my background. You know, I'm a product of California public education. I went to public schools from kindergarten through high school at the Campbell High School district here in San Jose, and then went to San Jose State. Got my degree in mathematics from San Jose State, and got my master's degree from San Jose State in cybernetic systems as well. So, you know, I'm an example of what's possible, at least going through the system. I was not a particularly dedicated student. I got much better when somebody was actually paying me to do things. But I think that the value of a prestige university, Stanford, Harvard, Caltech, schools like that, I mean, it's undeniable that gives you a leg up when you're entering the workforce, whether it's you want to go into academia or whether or not you want to go into industry or nonprofits and the like. And for freshly minted graduates, I think there's some value in making that distinction. And it has to do with your peers when you were in university. In other words, who got into Stanford versus who gets into, say, East Bay, California East Bay, which is public school, public college. Pretty much, it's very selective. In other words, if you made it into Caltech, you know, you were the cream of the crop. You know, you had already demonstrated your ability to persevere, to study, to budget your time, and you went to a high school that was preparing you adequately for such an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you want to go to East Bay, you may have had all those things and maybe you can't afford it, or you just didn't get selected. Or it may be that you didn't have a great public high school, or you weren't quite mature enough to do the budgeting, or you didn't have the family or neighborhood background to decide that education was the most important thing you could do. So there is some value of people who made it to a prestige university because they've already established the maturity to handle the workload. But that doesn't mean that someone who went through San Jose State or Chico or San Diego State didn't develop those while they were in college, or if it was due to income considerations, that they still didn't. They still got the same basic education that everyone else gets when they go to Cal State or go to Caltech or Stanford. So I think it's important for employers and anyone looking at fresh graduates to evaluate more than the name of the institution that they went to, but to look at what that person accomplished while they were in university and what hurdles they had to jump over just to get an education in whatever university they went to. So I think there's a value, again, in privileged universities because of the maturity that the student has displayed, but it shouldn't be the only value that counts.
So I wanted your opinion on someone who has equal ability as the person who was fortunate to be selected to attend a prestigious school. But because of luck, because the two individuals are equally smart, work as hard, but for some reason that person unfortunately wasn't accepted into one of those universities because they can only take so many people.
Yeah.
And yet in life, they're disadvantaged because they didn't get into the university that's highly recognized or considered Ivy League. As someone who started a corporation that's hugely successful, how do you feel about when resumes appeared in front of you and someone has an education from, say, Harvard or, say, Stanford, and someone from San Jose State? How do you, when you get those resumes before you, how do you decide which person is going to come in and interview with you? Or how did you?
I think, well, it's certainly the beginning stages of Oracle and the corporate culture was to be pretty selective. If we offered a position, certainly once we were going concern in 1981 or 82, we started in 1977, so it had a few years where we didn't hire that many people. But once we made it known that a position was available, we'd get hundreds of resumes. It wasn't if we had one job, we had 3 people to choose from. We had hundreds to choose from. So you have kind of a preliminary filter. Some of that is looking at the quality of the resume, just saying, is the resume grammatically correct? Was it sloppily put together or was it carefully put together? Is the English grammar correct? Did you spell everything correctly? All, the usual things that you look at, which right away disadvantages some applicants because of their background, regardless of how good a student they were. And then the second filter is really, well, where did they go to school? Assuming these are fresh graduates and not somebody with 5 years experience, but fresh graduates. And again, I go back to that, there is a value to looking at someone who made it into Stanford and the rigor that they had to apply to their lives before they entered college. So their rigor is ingrained in their personality. They did it through high school and they did it in college. But to your other point, you can have 2 individuals, one of which went to Stanford, one of which went to San Jose State, with close to equal high school grades, close to equal SATs, but maybe one had a better life story. And by that, I mean kind of the extracurricular activities that a student engages in. If you come from a disadvantaged background where extracurricular activity was probably a part-time job, you didn't have time to go spend the summer, feeding poor people in a soup kitchen or working on a back to nature farm or something like that for which you got no pay. as a volunteer effort, you had to go to school to help support yourself and support your family. And that, I think, disadvantages people who are already economically challenged. So that's, kind of the first kind of separator. So they may not have the same life story in terms of, their ability to give back to the community at an early age. Um, Part of what I've looked at when I see high school students and I observe my own kids going through high school and whatnot, that there's an awful lot of people from fairly privileged backgrounds who work hard at establishing their story arc. It's almost like they're putting a narrative together. So they select sports, they select extracurricular activities, whether it's, drama or speech and debate or whatever it is, and they select their volunteer activities based upon how it contributes to their story. And that's a luxury that many students don't have. The second part of that equation about who you pick has to do with the quality of the high school that kids went to. I mean, not everyone gets to go to Pali here in Palo Alto, which is as good as pretty much any private school that you can go to, and certainly the ability to go to private school. So if you have someone whose high school is not that challenged, who doesn't offer the advanced placement courses, or doesn't have a student body or administration who really can focus on those because they're focused on their student body who have, less privileged backgrounds or less of a family history that allows them to make those decisions. You'll have kids who don't get selected because they didn't go to a great high school, so they weren't adequately prepared to go to a four-year college,
Right.
or certainly to a Stanford. Maybe they were adequately prepared to go to San Jose State or go to Cal, but they weren't necessarily adequately prepared to go to Stanford, for example. Cal is when I say Cal, I don't just mean Berkeley. I mean Merced. I mean all the different Cal campuses, because Cal Berkeley is equivalent to Stanford in terms of education. Merced, maybe not as much, even though they teach all the same courses.
So, I mean, there's so much going on in the educational arena right now because of the pandemic. But before we go there, what advice do you have for someone who is, say, entering into college now and would like to go to work for a company like Oracle or Apple or Facebook or Google? What advice would you give them to prepare themselves to get into a company like that?
Well, I mean, first part of the story, if you look at, let's say Apple, let's pick on Apple just for fun. Basically the most prevalent degree among Apple employees are San Jose State. So in fact, they hire they hire a large number of graduates from San Jose State. And part of the feedback that I'm on the Tower Foundation San Jose State, and I'm also a graduate, so I do have just kind of full disclosure. Part of what we hear from employers, whether it's Apple or Google or anybody else, is that the students that come out of San Jose State are prepared to go to work. They are ready to do what it takes for a company. They may not be the kind of Stanford computer science research people, though they have those capabilities. They just didn't have the opportunity to do those kinds of researches. But they're ready to go to work on day one, and they like the tenacity that San Jose State students and East Bay students and Chico and Long Beach State and the various CSUs, the California State University System, has really done a good job for their successful students, those who made it through, got decent grade point averages, and stayed in a difficult major. So engineering students, math students, computer science students, bio students, things in what we call STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, who stayed in those disciplines. And they're very well ready to work. So it is absolutely possible to get placement in those kinds of companies, those high-level companies. So the advice I'd have for students who are entering college and they're prepared to do the work. I mean, there's certainly lots of students at prestige universities and in CSUs who are not really prepared for four-year college experience yet. And if you as a student diagnose your own deficiencies, whether it's in math, whether it's in language arts, whether it's in political science, you might do yourself a favor by going to a community college, a junior college, like De Anza or Foothill, for the first 2 years and make up those deficiencies. They teach the same courses at community college that you do at Cal. When the people I knew who went to like West Valley, they were using the same physics textbook that they were using at Cal. So it's not like the information is any different. But what it allows you to do is to take the, in some cases, remedial courses that you need in a less pressure cooker environment. It's a lot less expensive. And then at the end of your 2 years, when you have your 60 semester credits, you can automatically transfer to a CSU, and you may be able to transfer to a Cal. And all those units are transferable, assuming you took something other than what I call basket weaving. As long as you took significant courses to fill your general education requirements out, to get your major started, and to figure out to some extent what you really want to do with your life. So community college is a great resource, which I think is often overlooked by students who are not necessarily really ready just yet. And because they're local, you get to potentially stay at home, so you don't have the living expenses of living on campus somewhere. And then you transfer when you're a junior. And that's a great avenue. But the other thing I'd suggest to students who are entering college, whatever college it is, really decide when you start picking your majors, one, what your strengths are, but what do you really want to do for a career, and look at the income potential of that career. You know, I love art history, but it's not clear that you're going to be able to have a lot of jobs in that field. If you major in STEM, there's lots of jobs in those fields kind of automatically, because that's where our society is now. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But if what you're looking at is career potential, so you're really looking at job training, you know, it's important to look at what you're majoring in and what the career possibilities are in terms of income, location, that you don't necessarily look at when you just want to do something that, you know, fills your passion. My suggestion to a lot of students is, you know, make your minor. You know, you have a major and you have a minor. Make your minor your passion. Maybe you major in computer science, but you minor in art history or in music, or like I did, philosophy. You know, my minor was in philosophy, San Jose State, or English, or Spanish, or, you know, whatever. But pick your minor if your major doesn't fit your passion, to be your passion.
And what I've noticed since living in America, because where I grew up, students don't graduate from school with debt. The debt comes in a form of service. For example, I went to nursing school, and I didn't have to pay for my education. What I had was I owed the government years of service for the years of education that I received. And that's how the system was set up back when I went to school. It's probably changed by now, because that's been a long time ago. But what I noticed when I came to the US is almost a large percentage of Americans graduate in debt. And so before they even begin their lives, they have debt. And that was a real foreign concept to me. I have a difficult time wrapping my head around it. Yeah. So when you've gone to like some of these institutions that are not really recognized, and I know of situations where people have paid private colleges, and in the middle of it, they shut down. And this person doesn't even have the degree, but they have the debt. How can you address the situations where you go to college and when you are so young and you're trying to wrap your head around what you want to do, and you go down a certain career path and you pay for it, but by the time you graduate, you've matured and that's really not what you want to do? I mean, what do you want to say to that?
Well, let's look at it from a couple of different things. One is the debt aspect. I think that many colleges like Stanford and Harvard have instituted policies in the last 4 or 5 years that essentially they will admit you in what's called needs blind.
Okay.
They don't look at your application to find out whether or not you can afford school. They can admit you anyway. And for example, at Stanford, if your family income is less than 125,000, you basically get to go tuition free.
Mhm.
You may have a job on campus, depending upon your income level and whatnot, but you get to go tuition free to Stanford. And that's true of many becoming, because they have huge endowments.
Mhm.
And so they're using those endowments, I think, in a reasonably good way to allow students to enter their university who couldn't necessarily afford it otherwise. For students who can't qualify for Stanford, so you're going to go to Cal or San Jose State, or a less selective private school. Um, my vote is almost always with a public college. At least in the state of
Woohoo!
California. Yeah, at least within the state of California. So California is still fairly unusual in the United States for having a well-supported public college system, where it doesn't cost as it costs a lot less to go to San Jose State. I think it's around $7,500 per year for tuition. Then you have room and board on top of that. But so you figure it's about 10,000 a year when you cover books and other expenses and whatnot when you go into school. And if you're living at home, you can make that amount of money working part-time and over the summer. So
Mhm.
you could be self-funded. And if your parents have the means, maybe they've been able to put away the $40,000 or so that you need to go there. Cal is a little bit more expensive. I think it's 10,000 for their tuition. I'm not positive on that because I haven't looked at that recently, but that's a bargain compared to, say, Stanford, which is 60,000, or a lot of public universities in other states charge 20, 30, 40,000 a semester as well. So they are, California State supports their schools reasonably well, not as well as when I went to school. When I went to San Jose State, the tuition was $57 because it was basically,
Are you kidding me?
I'm
There
not
was a
kidding.
time when your education cost 57?
Yeah, in 1960, Jerry Brown's father, Edmund G. Pat Brown, and the legislature passed the California Education System Act, and it increased our state income taxes to pay for essentially free university from community college all the way through PhD. And that was the community college system, we called junior colleges at the time, CSU, California State Universities, and Cal, the California university system. And they were all essentially 100% paid for by state taxes. So the students paid very little. I think the $57 was for the student body fee, and I think there's a student union fee, and there's some small amounts. What's happened since then, starting in about the mid 70s, California's priorities changed for whatever reason. And we can blame Reagan, we can blame Democrats, we can blame anything we want to. We can blame unions, and I don't think any of them are actually to blame. I just think that the public changed what it wanted from state services, and a lot of the money that used to go to fund public colleges was reduced and was diverted elsewhere in the state. So whereas when I went to San Jose State, about 100% of the cost of educating an undergraduate was covered by the state. Now it's less than 50%. So the public colleges have to make up that difference, one by tuition and second by philanthropy. Kind of the same thing that the Harvards and the Stanfords do. They have massive fundraising programs from their alumni, from businesses and foundations. San Jose State and Cal, or CSU and Cal, are both doing that now. So San Jose State had their first big fundraising drive several years ago, and they got about $250 million out of that, and that goes into a fund that they use for scholarships to help fund what the state doesn't any longer. In addition to that, we have philanthropists, and I'm on the Tower Foundation, which is the fundraising arm of the university, and it's associated university, but it's not part of the university system. It's an independent fundraising group composed mostly of alumni, but that's what we do. So a lot of that is being deferred. But for students who either can't get summer jobs or they can't live at home, certainly in places like San Jose, Silicon Valley, the bigger cost over the tuition is the cost of room to work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know what apartments cost around here.
Yes.
And so you'll find a reasonable number of San Jose State students, for example, have food issues. How do they get if hunger issues? How do they feed themselves? And where do they live? We have students who are living in their cars and going to soup kitchens to get food because
That's so sad.
they're paying for university and they can't afford the room and board. So
Ed, can I interrupt you right there?
Sure, yeah.
This is where I really struggle, because could you imagine someone making that kind of a sacrifice for a good education, and yet when it's all done and they've done extremely well, because the institution in which they're getting this education is not really acknowledged, oftentimes they can't even get the job in the company that they want, because even though they made that sacrifice and worked so hard, people who are applying for the same jobs have graduated from the institutions that are preferred.
Well, I mean, again, to go back to my point earlier that, the most prevalent degree at Apple is San Jose State. And in fact, if you look at Silicon Valley in general,
yes,
more than half the engineers and computer science professionals and whatnot for all the companies in Silicon Valley come from San Jose State.
But can I ask you, do you know if the same criteria is adhered to in other companies like Facebook and Google? And
well, if I look at all of Silicon Valley, all the companies, whether it's Facebook or Oracle or over half the engineers come from San Jose State.
Mm-hmm.
So San Jose State degreed people have more degrees than all the other universities in the world combined here in Silicon Valley. It might be tougher if you want to go to work in Austin, Texas, where probably people from University of Texas. So the fact that you can get those jobs and more than half the engineers in Silicon Valley in those technical positions come from San Jose State also says something about if you're and we saw this during the beginning of the 2008 crisis, the economic, when you had students saying, it's not fair, I went to school, I got a degree and I can't get a job and it's been 2 years. If you look at more carefully at those interviews, there were vanishingly few people with technical degrees, STEM majors, science, technology, engineering, and math, who were going without jobs. That's not who was having trouble. It was people who majored in psychology, but they didn't have a master's degree, who majored in art history, English, less technical degrees. And I don't mean to denigrate those degrees at all, but there are fewer entry-level positions that are not something completely outside. So if you're an art history major, maybe you can get a job in a mailroom, but that's not where you thought you were going to go to work.
Exactly.
So there it's go back to my prior point. When you're entering school and you look at what you're going to major in, you have to look at the career opportunities for people with those majors. And there are lots of studies. You can go to the Newsweek studies, and there's tons of studies that you can figure who gets paid the most. Turns out who gets paid the most right now is chemical engineering majors. But computer science and electrical engineers are right up there, and those are tough jobs. I don't mean to say that those are easy majors. Those are tough majors, but nonetheless, people with those majors who decided to go that route don't usually have problems getting employment unless their grade point average is really terrible. Mm-hmm. So as long as they worked hard and they got a B+ average or above, they're likely to be able to find employment fairly easily, even in tough times. It's also true if you decided to go to a junior college and learn how to be an electrician or a plumber, you're likely to find jobs in those fields. You have a skill that's in demand. So it's really important for students to look at what they want to do with their careers and what that career opportunity looks like. Will they be happy having to compete with 10 other people for the same job? There's one job and there's 10 other people, and 3 of those people have engineering degrees and they don't. So that may be a more important distinguishing characteristic, whether it's Stanford or San Jose State. It's whether you majored in, a non-technical degree or you majored in a technical degree.
Let's talk about Ed.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Hi.
you went to San Jose State.
Yes.
When you were in college, when you were going to San Jose State, did it ever occur to you that you would be forming a mega corporation when you graduated? Was there anywhere along your education that you knew when you got out, this is what you would do? And if not, how did you end up doing that?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I graduated in 1968. So during that time period, we didn't have the entrepreneurial spirit and culture that we have now. It just was not a thing that people did. I mean, Fairchild turned into Intel in about 1960, and so there were some companies that were coming up, both were in the hardware space, but there weren't a lot of them. So there weren't the kind of entrepreneurial spirit we have now, where every time you turn around, your best friend has started a new software company or a new venture to do something in bio, whatever it has to be, or to provide services for those companies. Right. So and if I go back to majors again, if you're an English major, if you're a tech writer, you've got your income for life. And you could probably do it freelance or form a company to do writing for companies, just as an example. So I think that, I never anticipated. My goal was to get my math degree. I was always a science and math guy. So I discovered computers. I built a computer when I was in the 8th grade and stuff like that. But I really wasn't considering that as a career until I was a senior. And I took a particular class from a particular instructor who really inspired me. And he hired me at the company he worked for at the time. And but it was just a big company. It was Singer. The people made sewing machines, but they made computers at the time. And so I was working for a big company. So my goal was work for big companies, have a career, be a manager, maybe be a vice president or something like that someday. So that was what I thought. And it wasn't until I was kind of in the middle of all of that, and I'd gone through the Army and I got out of the Army to begin to look at when I met Bob Miner and Larry Ellison, we started to think about doing a spinoff because there were starting to be some notion of software spinoff where you didn't have to spin off to build hardware. You were building software. And that was just at the very beginning. In the year that Oracle was formed, Microsoft also started and Apple started. So it was kind of a miracle year in terms of in 1977, those companies all got going. So so we didn't really think, even when we started Oracle, which was the time of software development laboratories, we started as a consulting outfit. We were going to do contract software for other companies who especially hardware companies who didn't have in-house talent. So we built software. That's what we started doing. And we made the business decision pretty early on that if we built a product, we could leverage our talents better. So that's
a great story. I like it. So you were pleasantly surprised when Oracle boomed and is still booming.
Yeah, well, it took a couple of years because we did some consulting. We were building the product. We used the money from consulting to fund building the product. And then we got our first contract with a national security agency, not the NSA, but another we'll call spyware, who was going to use our software for analysis. They weren't really using it to, put cameras in your bedroom or something like that. That's not what we did. It was to, help the analyst correlate all the data, and that's where we got started. But also Bell Labs bought a copy of the software, and that's beginning to the point that we started making sales. We doubled every year from about 1980 through when we went public in 86, and we kept doubling after that up until about 1988. So when you double every year, we amateurs in business can cover a lot of our errors because our revenue just doubled. So you solve problems with money.
This is great. I mean, like you said, there's so many companies just popping up everywhere. And I think it's because there's so much ability. And a lot of times people have the calling, but they're afraid. And so I really applaud the people who weren't afraid, because now we have Oracle, now we have Google, now we have Apple. And if every one of these companies, if the founders allow doubt and fear to get in the way, could you imagine the world without Apple, without Google, without LinkedIn, without Zoom.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of different dynamic. When we started, of course, we were all in our 30s, which is kind of old to be an entrepreneur these days. At least some people think so. So we all had houses and kids and all that kind of stuff. So when we started the company, we were kind of taking a risk that you bet your house kind of a thing, and that was where kind of the founding capital. There were no venture capital to speak of at the time. So we basically our houses were on the line to get the money we needed to run the company. A lot of startups now will happen with relative kids. They're 20, 21, they're just out of school, and they start a business pretty much right away because they have a good idea. They get financial backing to start that, and they don't really have the family responsibilities yet. So as they get going, they can kind of afford to, live in a dump, so to speak, while they get their companies going. Some succeed, some don't. Some get bought out by Microsoft. You never know. Like LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft now.
So as someone who started a company and founded a very successful company, why do you think some companies fail and some don't, just based on your experience?
I've seen some, because I've been an advisor for several companies as they're getting started and trying to help them understand how to grow a company and especially around who to hire, things like that. But it's because I don't know enough about the new technology to help them technology wise. What I find companies that don't make it, either their idea is just not right.
Okay.
They do something and it's just not going to work that way. Other times it's that they start doing what I call chasing this shiny object. So they don't focus. They hear an opportunity. They start devoting their resources to follow that opportunity. And then something else shinier shows up and then they switch and they do that. And they're just they're whipsawed all over the place and they forget what their core mission is. The second thing is companies are underfunded. If they don't have a revenue stream coming in from paying customers, it's hard if you're underfunded. Then you can't hire the people you want to hire. You can't get the facilities you want. And so you're always kind of struggling. Oracle was fortunate. We had a contract when we started. So we had money coming in, plus the loans we got to put our houses on the line. We had money coming in from a contract, so we could fund ourselves with that. And then once we started selling Oracle as a product, we had revenue money coming in for that. But what we found, and what a lot of companies I think don't understand, is that you shouldn't spend money ahead of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there are times it makes sense to do that if you need a big marketing campaign and you can't afford it and whatnot. But an awful lot of companies, they'll get the posh office space and they'll get the fancy computers or whatever else they need, and even hire extra. We'll hire these 10 extra people because we might grow. Well, if they don't grow, those 10 people don't get paid for, or that fancy office. So I think often companies
burn unnecessarily.
Yeah, the burn rate is too high. What Oracle did, we generally hired behind revenue. So we'd be short of staff. Our offices were always a little too crowded. The computer room was always a little bit too noisy, and we always were looking for more people because we didn't have enough people. We were limited by personnel because we wouldn't hire ahead of revenues. We'd hire behind revenues, and that allowed us to never have to go out and get significant venture capital. The only time we wanted to get venture money was we really wanted their expertise. We didn't need their money.
Got it. So you know that we are living in a pandemic, and I've been speaking to so many parents who are concerned for their children because of this distance learning. And these are people who can pay for extra help. So it makes me think about the parents who can't afford, one, to pay for extra help if the kids have fallen behind, and two, can't even help the children because academically they're not in a place where they can help the kids, either because of their poverty level or because they don't speak the language. Do you have any ideas for those people if they're watching this?
I think that part of it is is not just the parents, academic preparation, so they can't really help their kids with algebra or whatever. But it applies to lower grades. The parents do probably have the academic preparation to help them with arithmetic and maybe fractions and how to write a sentence and things like that. But often the parents who are in that same situation, they don't have the family structure because either both parents are working just to make ends meet, especially in Silicon Valley where things are so expensive. And they don't have kind of the infrastructure to take care of the kids and to make sure the kids really, in fact, sit in front of their Zoom call for 4 hours a day. They do the assignments, they do the extra reading, all the stuff that is kind of expected, by the school and can be sort of enforced if the kids are in school and they're there for 6 hours. Well, they can sort of make them do their homework in class and things like which they do. But I think the other aspect is that people with disadvantaged backgrounds, I mean, if one, they had to buy an iPad or a computer or something like that. So that's, 500, 600, $700 just to buy that tool, and then $50 to $100 a month for your internet fee. They may not have that disposable income, especially during the pandemic, where many parents, one of the two parents, can't work outside the home because they feel the responsibility to stay with their kids. Their kids are younger, so they really can't just say, oh, you're on your own for 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day. So their income has gone down in the middle of the pandemic. And so those extra expenses are insurmountable in some cases. So we need to find a better way to treat, internet infrastructure kind of like a phone line. Everybody should have one. You should be able to have that like electricity. Every house is wired for it, and there's bargain rates if you can't afford more significant rates. And it shouldn't be considered as charity. That should just be the way the rates are structured. The same thing with, everybody ought to be able to have some form of computing device in the house that connects to the internet, because it just is imperative. It's like having a telephone. It's like having one TV, not several, but one. So same kind of thing.
Ed, we're almost out of time, but I cannot wrap this interview up without having you tell us about your Rock Your Business.
Okay. Yeah, Rock Your Business is a firm I formed several years ago, basically to do a combination of corporate entertainment, team building for corporate events. So if a corporation is having a big sales meeting or they just want to have their offsite team building event, weekend supply, the rock stars, it's Rock Your Business. We have access to rock stars anywhere from people who are in backing bands for famous musicians to the famous musicians themselves. It all depends upon how much money you have to spend and how much time you have to do. So we do that, and we've been doing it since 2018. There certainly took a hit during the pandemic because all live events stopped, and we tried to do some online events. They can work, but companies are basically scaling back from all of that stuff, and it's starting to come alive again. So we kind of were on hiatus from about the beginning of 2020 until just recently. So we're starting up again.
So if you're watching this and you want some rock stars to come and rock your business, and I would imagine during the pandemic, which has sort of caused a reset in everybody's business and life, you may want to contact Ed because he can come and rock your business back to either where it was or a new beginning for the better. But keep this in the back of your mind that Ed and his band can help you rock your business back to what you want it to be. So
yeah, the way to contact is info@rockyourbusiness.com.
I thank you so much, Ed. You're such a wealth of information, and congratulations on back in the 60s having the guts and the tenacity to start Oracle, because a lot of people are benefiting from it today. And I thank you so much for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. Hopefully Ed has inspired, educated, and encouraged you in some way. And if you're a parent watching this and you have concerns with your children's education, hopefully you've heard something here today that can help you to seek out what might benefit your family and your children. And I promise to continue bringing you wonderful people like Ed. And I will see you next time. And thank you again for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. When a conversation is all you need to be inspired, like this inspirational person I shared with you today. And I will see you next time.
Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.